Welcome to the GSMC Car Podcast, the show that takes you on a journey to the automotive world. We talk about the latest news, from new makes and models to new technology to all of the must-have options available. Whether you're a fan of the old classics, love the latest models and technology, or have never met a vehicle you didn't want to work on, the GSMC Car Podcast has something for every car enthusiast.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Car Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, David Lucy Mabel. Okay, it is a wonderful day in the car community. Thank you for tuning in, y'all. We are going to be talking about the 2020 Toyota Supra, which has been announced since last year and has been in production since last year. Let's get started. Okay, so now that the new Supra is out, what's so special about it? What is the hype all about? Okay, just to preface this, to make a long story short, the Supra is coming back to the market after a 17-year hiatus. You see, the last Supra was the Mark IV that was produced from 1993 to 1998 in America, for the American market, that is, and it was produced until 2002 abroad for other markets. So it's been 17 years since we've last seen a Supra. What does this mean? Why is it that all the car companies are bringing their old cars back? What does the car community have to say about this? What do regular people have to say about this? Well, I'll tell you. The new 2020 Supra has been received very well, very wonderfully, lots of hype, and people are all over it. People love it. Of course, there's still some people who gripe. There's still some people who moan and complain and bellyache, but you're always going to find that whenever a car company decides to bring back an old car, they're going to tell you that, oh, well, it wasn't as good as the first one. It wasn't good as the second one. So basically, what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be talking about the new Supra. Does it live up to its hype? What's so great about it? Then we're going to be discussing the competition. Of course, there's competition out there, and I would say the competition is stiff for this market. Unlike the C8 Corvette, which is going into a market segment that is largely, I guess, uncompeted. It's not really being competed against the C8 Corvette. The Toyota Supra is going in with some stiff competition, and we're going to see how it stands up. And we're going to be discussing, of course, the long and storied past of the Toyota Supra. And if you stay tuned to the last segment, you're going to be hearing my personal thoughts on what I think of the new Toyota Supra and what I think other car companies, especially the Japanese car companies, should do to respond. Because when you look at it, I mean, Toyota's pretty much alone as far as a new, exciting sports car, in this market segment, in this price point, as far as the Japanese automakers go. Honda doesn't really have anything, and Nissan's 370Z is hopelessly antiquated. So we're going to hope that they come out with the 400Z at some point to give the Toyota Supra a run for its money. So honestly, let's get started. So now that the new Supra is out, does it live up to its hype? Let's just say it does, but not in the same way that I personally expected it to. I was expecting the new Toyota Supra to be an insane performer from the factory and was going to blow everybody out of the water, and it's just going to be super lightweight, super fast and everything. And to be honest, that's not what it is. It wasn't an insane performer from the factory, but I think Toyota did this on purpose. Why would you ask that Toyota would purposely sell a car that wasn't as good from the factory. If you look back to the days of the old Supra, and whenever I refer to the old Supra, just to put it out there, I'm going to be referring to the 4th generation because that is the most popular and that is the most immortalized version of the Supra. There were 4 generations before this current 5th generation, but the 4th generation is the one that people remember the most. I'm going to be referring to that whenever I say the old Supra. But when you look at the old Supra, this was a tuner's dream. The 2JZ engine could handle enormous amounts of boost. I mean, there was a turbo version of this. People have been able to get these things up to 900 something horsepower on the original block. I mean, it's ridiculous. Well, the reason why Toyota offered the 5th generation Supra with almost a detuned version when it was first coming out, they wanted people to be able to tune it. They wanted to encourage tuners to tune their car, and they knew that in the future, just like they're coming out with 2021, they're going to come out with a more performance-oriented version of the Supra. So when you offer a bare bones package from the factory as far as performance goes, it gives people an opportunity to tune it, especially that the new Toyota Supra has been purposely built for people to tune, so things are easy to work on, things are easy to modify, and I think Toyota did that on purpose, which I would say is a very smart move on Toyota's part because they know exactly who's going to be buying the Supra, and they know exactly what's going to happen to the Supra. The Supra is going to be bought new, it's going to be enjoyed, and eventually, years from now, it's going to be passed down to second, third owners that are going to take them and that are going to tune them, that are going to modify them, that are going to slap big old turbos on them, just like they did to the Supras of old. I mean, to some cars, that's an absolute nightmare. You don't want to take, a Porsche and then tune a Porsche and chop it and put all sorts of foolishness on it. A Porsche is meant to be sold like that from the factory. Same thing with a Lamborghini or a Ferrari. But a Toyota Supra especially, is meant to be tuned, and it is a tuner's dream, if I can put it that way. We were complaining that it was a merger with BMW. Was our belly aching justified? And by we, I mean me and a bunch of the other purists out there. Let me preface this. The Toyota Supra has always been purely a Toyota product. The Toyota Supra has been purely a legendary Toyota product. The Toyota Supra has been immortalized in pop culture. And of course, I'll get into that more when I discuss history. So the fact that Toyota decided to merge with BMW, of all people, to make the new 2020 Toyota Supra, we were complaining. We were saying, well, if the Toyota Supra has always been an independent product from Toyota in the past, why did they feel the need to merge with BMW? And in retrospect, when you think of BMW, people typically think, oh, this is the driver's car. Oh, it's meant for the fun of driving. It's meant for the road. It's meant for a sporty feel. It's meant for competition. It's meant for people who enjoy driving, not just people who want a luxury car, but people who want a luxury car that also performs well, which not all luxury cars do that. So Toyota, in retrospect, I would say made a smart move to merge with BMW. As people who are privy to the new Toyota Supra know, the Toyota Supra is built on a shared platform with the BMW Z4 that BMW and Toyota merged to develop the Z4 and the Toyota Supra, and it has the same base engine that is also from BMW. I think it's great. I think it's a wonderful idea. My only, concern would be reliability. Because as much as I love BMW, as much as people out there love BMW, we're not going to pretend that BMW has Toyota levels of reliability. I guess more research should be done whether the engine is a BMW design that's being used by Toyota, or if it's a Toyota design that's being used by BMW. I would much more be inclined to say that it is a BMW design being used by Toyota. So I am concerned about the German engineering that might fail. I'm concerned about reliability because, as we know, BMWs aren't the most reliable cars on earth, and Toyotas are some of the most reliable cars on earth. So it's going to be interesting how the two come together in the new Toyota Supra. I am excited to see it, though. How does it compare to the old Supra? So, as I look at my notes here, as I look at the specs that I've written down, the new Toyota Supra from 2020 is actually shockingly similar to the old Toyota Supra. Let's just talk about engine. The old Toyota Supra, the Mark IV, was the 2JZ inline 6 engine that was absolutely incredible in every way, shape, or form. That was also offered in the Toyota Cressida of the time period. It made 220 to 325 horsepower. The 325 horsepower would be fully optioned, the turbo package. The car weighed 3,100 to 3,400 pounds, and it did 0 to 60 in 4.6 seconds. Now, let's just imagine that. 0 to 60 in 4.6 seconds in 1993. I read a review, this was Car and Driver, pitting the old Supra against the new Supra, and they used a 1993 model, and it did 0 to 60 in 4.6 seconds. I mean, 0 to 60 in 7 seconds was a big deal in the 90s. 0 to 60 in 6 seconds was a big deal. 0 to 60 in 4.6 seconds was absolutely unheard of. I mean, there are cars today that are performance-oriented that do not do 0 to 60 in 4.6 seconds. And the year is 2020, where we're rapidly approaching the 2-point-something second mark in some of the most insane cars. So the fact that this was able to do 0 to 60 in 4.6 seconds, I guess, lends itself to the fact that the Mark IV Supra was so legendary. I mean, that would do it. The new Supra that is being offered, obviously, from 2019 to the present, the horsepower ratings are from 194 horsepower to 382 horsepower. This Supra is offered with 2 engine choices as of now. We don't know if there's going to be a more performance-based engine in the future because Toyota is keeping their options open, which, like any smart company would. The 4-cylinder and the 6-cylinder. The 4-cylinder base model comes with 194 horsepower. And the 6-cylinder model, I believe there's a turbo version of it, comes with 382 horsepower. So you can get it from 194 to 382 horsepower. This is not too terribly different from the 220 to 325 that was offered in the Mark IV Supra. 0 to 60 is 3.9 seconds. It's been 17 years, and the 0 to 60 time has improved by 0.7 seconds. That's a lot. I know 0.7 seconds is less than a second, but it is a lot. It gives this car a new category of performance. But on the flip side of that, I say it's a lot, but when you look in terms of technology, in terms of how cars have advanced over the past 20 or so years, that's actually not that much. That's just to show you how much the Mark IV Supra lived up to the hype that it produced from the movies, from the video games, from the pop culture that surrounded it, to the 2020 Supra that really has to fill in those big shoes, so to speak. I mean, this is going to be very interesting to see what Toyota does concerning the new Mark V Supra, if I could put it that way. You have a car that really reached the height of publicity. It reached the height of hype, if I could put it that way. It reached the height of every car's dream, so to speak, is to be immortalized in movies, to be immortalized in video games, to be immortalized in the psyche of the car enthusiast. How many cars can live up to that hype? How many Japanese cars can live up to that hype? I mean, Japanese cars here in America are typically seen as boring econoboxes, in which most of them are. But when you have a Supra and you take it from what it was and you bring it into the modern era, I mean, people are obviously going to be all over that, which is part of the allure of bringing back old cars. It's part of the allure of bringing back old nameplates, is the fact that those cars were so legendary that when you bring it back, you create a dichotomy of sorts. You create a huge revived hype for the car and say, oh my gosh, I hope this is as good as the old one. But then you also create, oh my goodness, this is really good, but is it as good as the old one? You get that sort of diverging view. Some people are like, oh my gosh, this is so great. Other people are like, well, it's not as good as the old one. And we're going to see in following years how the new Toyota Supra really holds up to that. So in the next segment, we are going to be discussing the competition because, like I said, there is stiff competition in this segment. And if you stay tuned till the very end of the podcast, in the last segment, I'm going to be discussing what my personal thoughts are, more in depth, obviously. And I'm going to be discussing what I believe other car companies should do to combat this because the new Toyota Supra is fresh. It's hot, it's new, right off the press, and it is a force to be reckoned with, if I could put it that way. So please stay tuned for the next segment.
Are you a business owner? Someone interested in the latest news that might affect your business? Then check out the GSMC Business News Podcast, a show dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning business, technology, and the stock market. Get a head start on the day as we keep you updated on the latest goings-on Wall Street, money, jobs, and technology. The GSMC Business News Podcast has you covered.
Alrighty, folks, welcome back. So I told you that in the last segment, what was new about the Toyota Supra? Does it live up to the hype of the old Mark IV Supra? And now we're going to be discussing the competition. All right, let's begin. So, like I said, there is some stiff competition in this segment. Let's look at what the competition has to offer. There are several, as you do research, there are several cars that are considered competitors, even the C8 Corvette. I have purposely left out the C8 Corvette because the way I guess, determine competitors is basically not just in terms of performance, but in terms of layout. We are having a car that's front-engined, rear-wheel drive. I mean, there's a Porsche in there that's rear-wheel drive, rear-engined, but mid-engine cars don't belong in this category. Mid-engine cars are in a class of their own, so that's why I've left out the C8 Corvette. We have the Nissan 370Z. We have the new Nissan 400Z whenever it decides to come out. We have the Porsche 718 Cayman S. We have the BMW M2, and we have the Audi TT RS that is not out yet, but that's going to be out within the next year or two. So pardon me, but I do not have any information on the Audi TT RS because obviously it hasn't hit the market yet. So we're going to be talking about horsepower. We're going to be talking about weight. We're going to be talking about 0 to 60 times, and we're going to be talking about manufacturer suggested retail price, MSRP. Those are pretty much the most important things you want to discuss when you're discussing a sports car. And these are the things that you're going to want to discuss when you're discussing any sort of competition from the car world. Because horsepower is important for people who want to buy a sports car. It's not like they're buying a Toyota Avalon and they don't care how much horsepower it has, but they care how many cup holders it has. They're not talking about an SUV in which they couldn't care less about how much it weighed. They want off-road power. We're talking about 0 to 60 times. They're not talking about a minivan that they're going to haul their family around in. They're wanting to take this car to the track. They're wanting to, zip this car around mountain roads, around corners, and all sorts of foolishness as that. And of course, price is important for any segment of the car world that you're going to be talking about. So let me look at the specs that I have written down for these cars. We have The Nissan 370Z. The Nissan 370Z, as I mentioned in my latest podcast about the new Nissan Z car, the 370Z has been in production since 2009. It's been in production for 11 years. It is aging. It is aging well, I will say, but it is still aging, and it definitely shows its age when stacked up against the Toyota Supra. Nissan's kind of slacking in this category. I'm not going to lie. When you look at the 370Z, it has 332 horsepower. In comparison with 382 horsepower if you get a fully optioned new Supra. It weighs 3,333 pounds. They like repeating numbers, apparently. The new Supra weighs at most 3,351 pounds. So it weighs like 18 pounds less than the new Toyota Supra, if I can do math correctly. Don't quote me on that. And 0 to 60 in 4.6 seconds. The new 370Z makes 0 to 60 in 4.6 seconds. The old Mark IV Supra made 0 to 60 in 4.6 seconds 17 years ago. So, I mean, like I said, the 370Z is definitely showing its years in terms of performance. But here's the big point. The 370Z starts out at $30,090. The new Supra starts out at $49,990. So for similar performance and for still a legendary name brand, if I could put it that way, the Z cars have been legendary, and they've been legendary without, skipping any generations in their lineup. I mean, they offer it for nearly $20,000 less than the new Toyota Supra. And I guess the Toyota Supra has its German engineering to thank for that, because German cars have never been cheap. They're always expensive. And this is basically a Japanese car of German heritage, as odd as that sounds. So I would say, even though the Nissan 370Z is aging, it is hopelessly antiquated. But I will say that, from my own estimation at least, that is a bargain compared to the Supra. Most people who are going to be buying this sort of car don't really care about interior quality. If they cared about interior quality, they would be buying a luxury car. They don't really care about, I guess, technology so much, because like I said, if you were going to be caring about technology or interior quality, you would buy a luxury car. They care about performance, and the performance, frankly, is not that far off. Similar horsepower numbers, similar weight ratings, similar 0 to 60 times. Of course, there's 0.7 seconds between the two of them, but I mean, in regular everyday driving, that's not going to really matter. And it's nearly $20,000 left. And something tells me, because this car is so old, they're probably having trouble selling it. You could probably find one for less than $30,000. I'm just going to be honest. Right off the lot, less than $30,000. And get this, it has a manual transmission. I have to have a short rant on the manual transmission. I'm not going to pretend like I know how to drive a manual transmission, because I don't. But I will tell you that manual transmissions are very important to car enthusiasts, even those who don't know how to drive them. Because when I finally do learn how to drive a manual transmission, I will tell you, just like anybody who drives a manual, I will tell you that it makes you more connected to the car. You buy a sports car to be connected to the car. You buy a sports car to feel at one with the car, to sound as corny and as cliche as I possibly could. But it's true. You want to be one with your machine. You want to be one with your car. You don't want to be floating around and letting the car do all the work for you. Part of the fun of owning a sports car is not only going fast, but is also making the car go fast yourself by shifting gears. The new Toyota Supra, oh dear, it doesn't offer a manual transmission, which is going to hurt it compared to the competition. As you can see, and as I will mention, all the competition offers a manual transmission. I'm going to leave it at that. I can't really say anything else. Toyota, it's not too late for you to come out with a manual transmission for the Mark V Supra. If anybody from Toyota ever listens to this podcast, please come out with a manual transmission. The car community will thank you happily. We know that they're not as fast as the dual clutch transmissions are offered today, but they are 1,000 times more fun. Moving on to the Porsche 718 Cayman S. The Porsche has 350 horsepower. It weighs 3,087 pounds, so slightly less than the Toyota Supra. It has slightly more, actually similar power to the Toyota Supra. It costs $69,900. Again, it's a German car. German engineering always costs more money. And it does 0 to 60 in 4.4 seconds. And it also comes with a manual transmission. The Porsche. Typically, if you were to ask me, I would never pit a Toyota Supra against a Porsche. But now, the Toyota Supra is basically a glorified German car. So German rivals from Porsche and BMW have made it onto the list, which I think is kind of crazy, but that's the case here. I mean, this is the new exciting world that we live in. The new Toyota Supra has German rivals. The old Toyota Supra, the rivals were pretty much Japanese. You had the Nissan Skyline, you had the Nissan 370Z, the Nissan Silvia, you had the Honda Prelude, maybe even the Honda NSX to a lesser extent. That was always a mid-engine car. Those were the cars that the old Supra competed with, and there was even some, strange Subaru from the time period too that was, a sports car, at least their attempt at a sports car that it could have also competed with. And of course, let's not forget Mitsubishi too. I mean, the Mitsubishi 3000 GT, that was crazy, or as it was known in Japan, the GTO. But now we have a German rival on the list. So let's see how it stacks up against that. 4.4 seconds for the Porsche 718 Cayman S. That's 0 to 60 time. That's actually pretty good. And I suspect that the reason why it's even that slow, 0.5 seconds slower, is because this has a manual transmission and it was most likely tested in the manual transmission mode. So having a person shift the gears is obviously not as fast as having a computer shift it, especially nowadays. So I believe that's the reason why it seems slow. But as far as pricing goes, this is about $20,000 more expensive than the new Supra. But at the same time, because it's a Porsche, it's going to be more luxurious. Because it's a Porsche, it's going to have reliability to back it up. And I'm not going to pretend like the new Toyota Supra is not going to be reliable. I mean, we don't know yet. But Porsche has a pretty loyal following. So to get any car loyalists from the Porsche to switch over to the Supra, I mean, that's unlikely. It's probably not going to happen. We have the BMW M2. The BMW M2, it's a little compact two-door coupe. It has almost like a notchback design. It almost looks like a two-door sedan, honestly, but that's been shrunk down. It's a very attractive vehicle, for those of you who don't know what it is, because it's not very common. It has 405 horsepower, 3,600 pounds is this curb weight, and it starts out at $58,900 and 0 to 60 in 4.2 seconds. This is the main competitor against the new Toyota Supra, which is kind of funny because when you consider the new Toyota Supra is basically a rebadged BMW Z4, and that its chief rival would be coming from somewhat internally the BMW M2. That's actually really interesting to think about. But the BMW Z4 obviously is a merger with this car, so it's not going to be considered a competitor. This BMW M2, this is what's going to give the Supra a run for its money. People who know will buy the BMW M2. People who care will buy the BMW M2 because they care about performance. They don't care so much about the name brand of the Supra. They care much more about the performance. They care about the fact that the BMW M2 comes with a manual transmission. And the fact that it's so close in price, I mean, it's only about $9,000 more. That is going to be worth it for some people to get a manual transmission, to get a small package, to get a car that is more powerful than any version of the Supra out on the market right now, 405 horsepower. It weighs a little bit more, but with that power, that's going to compensate for that. This, I anticipate, is going to be a better rounded version of the Supra. The only thing I will say, though, the Supra can be tuned. We don't know how tuner friendly the BMW M2 is. From my own experience with German cars, I mean, even though we don't have a tuner, but we have a heavily modified German car outside, German cars don't take very kindly to tuning because they're very, very particular in the parts that they receive, in how those parts ought to be set up, and how those parts interact with the other parts on the car. So tuner friendly, maybe not. So that might be giving the Toyota Supra a leg up in this market segment, if I could put it that way. And the Audi TT RS is not out yet, and the Nissan 400Z is not out yet. The one thing we do know about the Nissan 400Z, it's going to be based on a heavily modified platform of the current 370Z, and it's going to have 400 horsepower. The Toyota Supra, as of now, does not come with the 400 horsepower. The most it comes out is 380-something horsepower. So let's see what Nissan has to say in a year or two's time, whenever they come out with the 400Z. Let's see what they have to say against Toyota's Supra. Stay tuned for the next segment, in which we're going to be discussing the history of the Toyota Supra, where it came from, how it got to be the way it is, the hype. We're going to be discussing the Fast and the Furious. We're going to be discussing the late Paul Walker, may he rest in peace. We are going to be discussing all of those in the next segment, and please stay tuned till the end of the podcast. We're going to be discussing my personal thoughts on the Toyota Supra and what I believe the Japanese car companies should do to combat this. So please stay tuned and enjoy the break.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be, visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Okay, welcome back, my fellow car lovers. Now we are going to be discussing the history of the Toyota Supra. We discussed the new Supra. We discussed its competitors. Now, of course, we have to discuss the history. So, the Toyota Supra was produced from 1978 to 2002 originally, and then after a 17-year hiatus, came out in 2019, and it is still being produced currently. It has roots in the Toyota 2000 GT. I know the Toyota 2000 GT was never offered in the United States, and frankly, it was almost never offered anywhere because it only had 351 units produced. It is exceedingly rare, and it is, in my opinion, the most beautiful Toyota ever made. Gorgeous classic Coke bottle styling. It was a fastback. It had the classic Japanese fender side mirrors. I mean, it was, oh my goodness. It was It was absolutely beautiful. I mean, this is probably one of the most beautiful cars of all time, along with the Volkswagen Carmen Ghia, in my opinion, at least. The lines were just absolutely gorgeous, but I digress. This is what is considered the ancestor of today's Supra. Basically because it offered an inline six engine with a rear wheel drive, which has basically been the sweet spot, the sweet formula that has made the Supra so loved amongst car enthusiasts. So this is where the Supra began, at least spiritually. And the 2000 GT was produced from 1967 to 1970, so about 8 years before the Celica Supra came out. You will soon find out why I called it the Celica Supra instead of plainly just a Supra. So the Mark I Celica Supra is largely based on the Celica hatchback of the time period. The Celica was a small two-door car. It wasn't a huge performer. It was a sporty-ish car, but not extremely sporty. The Supra was basically the sport version of the Celica. So let's think about, this is basically a trim level that is being spun off into its own product line. So similar to how the DeVille was a Series 62 upscale model that offered more luxury, and then it got diverged into its own model line in 1959. Think of the same way with the Celica and the Supra, or think of the same way with the Skyline in the GTR. The Skyline still exists, but the GTR, which was known as the Skyline GTR, was a model that was spun off of the Skyline and is now its own model today. That is a far cry from the Skyline. So car companies tend to do that. I don't know why, but you know what? We're not going to complain because it's the Toyota Supra. This was originally pitted against the Nissan Z-Car. So this is where the long rivalry between the Supra and the Z-Car begun. This was basically like Japan's equivalent of the Camaro versus the Mustang. And of course you had, the Challenger in there too from Chrysler, which would be basically the Prelude from Honda, something that wasn't as popular, something that wasn't as well known, but that still competed against it. But this is basically Japan's version of Mustang versus Camaro. It was a Z-Car versus Supra, which is better. The Z-Car, I will say, lasted longer than the Supra. The Supra was discontinued for some ungodly reason. I don't know why. The Z-Car soldiered on. The Z-Car soldiered on. As antiquated as it is today, it is still a legendary dynasty of Japanese sports cars, if I could put it that way. This was also known as the Celica XX in Japan, and it offered the world's first navigation computer in 1981. Fun fact for you. The reason why I mentioned that is because the Toyota Supra, or the Celica Supra at the time, was a sports car, but it was more of a grand touring sports car. It was more of a luxurious car, and you will find that the next generation, the Mark II, was actually offered in sport or luxury types in the United States. There was a more sport-oriented version known as the Type P, or the P-type, I believe, meaning performance type. And then there was an L-type, meaning luxury type, obviously. So this Mark II Supra was produced from 1981 to 1985. This one had pop-up headlights. This was the first Supra to have pop-up headlights, and then that would be a trend that continued into the Mark III Supra, and then the Mark IV Supra opened its eyes again. And that was basically it. I mean, this was a grand touring model. It was more refined than the first, obviously. It was still basically a glorified Celica, built on the same platform, just a wider body, longer hood to accommodate the inline 6-cylinder as opposed to the Celica's inline 4-cylinder. This was the Celica Supra from 81 to 85. Nothing too terribly special about this generation. The Mark III Supra was produced from 1986 to 1993. This is the generation in which the Celica and the Supra were no longer associated with each other. The Supra grew wings. It flew out of the nest. It was no longer living under the shadow of the Celica. The Celica would continue up until, I believe the early 2000s. This generation, it was switched from rear-wheel drive to front-wheel drive, and it would remain front-wheel drive until the rest of its history. And then we have the Mark IV Supra. Now, of course, thank goodness this one is the last one on the list as far as the history of the Toyota Supra goes and the generations, but I think it's truly the best. At risk of sounding corny and cliche, we're going to save the best for last. The Mark IV Supra, produced from 1993 to 1998 in America, and produced from 1993 to 2002 elsewhere abroad in Japan, Europe, blah, 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 all those other places. This is the most legendary Supra. This was associated with the Fast and the Furious. This was associated with Paul Walker. This was associated with Gran Turismo, with Forza, with those video games, those movies that all of us car people grew up with, at least especially us 90s kids, grew up watching the movies, grew up playing the video games on our PlayStations, on our Xboxes, on our computers. We grew up seeing these things. Need for Speed franchise had Supras all over the place. I mean, this is a car that has basically gripped our minds, much like the R34 Skyline. Unlike the R34 Skyline, we were able to get the Supra with the 2JZ engine here in America. Thank goodness. Nissan really let us down as far as the Skyline GTR goes, but I'm still not salty. Everything's fine. But, I mean, this is the Toyota Supra. There was a Celica Supra, the Mark I. There was a Celica Supra Mark II. There was the regular old Supra in the Mark III. Those are largely forgotten. People who really know car history know about them, but the regular everyday car enthusiast doesn't really care for those. They care about the Mark IV Supra. And this is why prices and values have been going through the roof because of the hype. Not to say that these cars were insane performers from the factory. From the factory, they weren't insane performers. I mean, they weren't that great. They only offered 200 to 300 something horsepower. I mean, you know, there was only so much you could do with that car at the time period. But then there was a tuner scene that largely was inspired by movies like The Fast and the Furious, largely inspired by video games like Need for Speed, largely inspired by video games like Gran Turismo and Forza, largely inspired by the persona. This is a celebrity of the car world. Just like I mentioned earlier, this is what every car dreams to be. Every car wants to be wants to be a Toyota Supra. Every car wants to be a Nissan Skyline GTR. Not every car can be, though. Not every sports car can be. Not every Japanese car, especially because of the reputation they have here in America. They are more boring, reliable, everyday drivers than super fun, super fast cars that you can throw around corners. I mean, those are not typically associated with each other here in America. So when we think about the Mark IV Supra, this car is not a unicorn in the sense that it's rare, but it's a unicorn in the sense that it's super special. There will never be another car like it ever again. I can say that with great confidence, even as the new Toyota Supra comes out. The new Toyota Supra is not a Mark IV. It's not going to be immortalized in movies and video games. It's not going to have as much hype as the Mark IV did after it was no longer produced. Let's just talk more about the engine. The 2JZ engine, which was also put in the Cressida, like I mentioned earlier. The 2JZ engine is well known for its tunability. I don't know if that's a real word, but I'm going to use it. It was able to be tuned. People were able to get 900 something horsepower on the original block of the engine. That's almost unheard of, especially from a car from the 90s. 900 horsepower. In fact, my friend Grant, who is a car guy just as much as I am, if not more, he sent me a video of a really well-built Supra that has been heavily modified. This man was making 900-something horsepower, running the quarter mile in like 9-something seconds. I mean, it was ridiculous. This is the reason why the Toyota Supra of this generation is so hyped. I mentioned the Fast and the Furious. I mentioned the fact that it's forever immortalized. It has a huge pop culture following. I had a toy car Supra from Hot Wheels. I've driven the Supra virtually in any number of video games that I have. It's truly a wonderful car. I'm not just saying that because that's the correct thing to say. I'm saying that because in my own limited capacity, I've experienced this model of Toyota Supra. I've experienced what other people love about it. I've seen them at car meets. I've seen them in the wild, in the parking lot at the Edison Mall in Fort Myers. These cars are well loved. They are well liked and they are well appreciated, and they will forever live up to that hype, the Mark IV Supra. And they will be super collectible one day, as they're already becoming super collectible. And then we have the new Supra. The new Supra, this is basically what Toyota's mindset was. At least I can't read the mind of the wonderful Japanese people that are at the head of Toyota Motor Company in Japan. But I can almost say that this is what I believe they were doing. They had a car that was super hyped. I believe, frankly, they feel like they made a mistake discontinuing it. I mean, you have the Toyota 86, which is also the Scion FRS, which is also the the Subaru BRZ, but that's not a Supra. And I feel like that car, in a sense, was meant to live on as a spiritual successor to the Supra, but it's simply not a Supra. That's basically what the issue with it is. It's pretending to be a Supra. It fits in that same category as a Supra, but it is not a Supra. So Toyota decided to come back with the Supra to keep that legacy going of the legendary sports car, to keep the legacy going of the tunability of the old Supra, to keep the legacy going of the pop culture, to even keep a little bit of the design language in there too. And if you look very closely, the same Supra badge that was on the old Supra is the same Supra badge that is on the new Supra. So bringing in the old and making it new has been ever so tastefully done with the new Supra. The only complaint anybody has about it is the fact that it's a German car. Underneath the skin, it's a German car. And if the Mark IV Toyota Supra were a person, would it want its legacy to be mixed in with the legacy of German cars? I couldn't tell you. Part of it is what makes the Toyota Supra affordable, because it's a merger. It's not a completely new product. Part of it is what makes it desirable, the fact that it has BMW DNA. But part of it is also what makes us miss the old Supra, the fact that the old Supra was a Supra, a Toyota in its own right, instead of a rebadged BMW. So take it as you choose. The new Supra is a cup of tea for some, and for some, it's medicine that's hard to swallow. Please stay tuned for the next segment, however. As you can tell, I'm really excited about this, because I will tell you more of my personal thoughts and why I believe the Japanese car companies should do in response to the Toyota Supra. So please stay tuned after the break.
Do you work in the world of marketing and advertising? Are you a media buyer or the owner of an agency? Have you been looking for a podcast to help stay on top of all the goings-on of those worlds? The GSMC Marketing News Podcast is dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning marketing and advertising. Get the latest marketing news, from what major businesses have planned for the coming year to the newest trends in advertising, from podcasts, digital and streaming, to the old standbys of radio, television, and billboards. The GSMC Marketing News Podcast has you covered, whether you're a marketing agent or a business trying to expand your brand.
Okay, welcome back, car lovers. I'm going to be discussing now what my personal thoughts on the Toyota Supra are, what I like and what I don't like. I will tell you from the beginning, there's not much that I don't like. Surprise, surprise. There's not much that I don't like about the new Toyota Supra. Wow, where do I even begin? The Toyota Supra in styling, it's absolutely gorgeous. I was in Japan last year. As I mentioned before in several podcasts, I saw a new Toyota Supra at the Toyota History Garage in Odaiba, Japan, which is actually part of the Venus Mall, or whatever it's called over there. This new Toyota Supra is small. It's elegant. It's beautiful. It's shrunk in size, as a matter of fact. It doesn't keep up with the same trend as when a retro car comes out, it's larger than the one before. This one is smaller. It's more dainty. It's more elegant. The other one was a 4-seater, 2x2. This one is purely a 2-seater. This is a true sports car. It is a true sports coupe. I don't know if they'll ever come out with a convertible version of it. I really don't care. But this is a true sports car. I think it's a great idea. Will it live up to the hype? Probably not. Does that necessarily mean a bad thing, though? Absolutely not. And I think it's actually a good thing that this is not going to be as hyped up as the old ones, because the old Toyota Supra is still a 90s sports car. Turbo lag is a thing. Build quality as far as just materials go, the materials weren't that nice. I mean, it was a Toyota from the 90s. It was very well built, very durable materials, but it's not like it was leather on every surface or anything like that. It was not like there was, infotainment systems or backup cameras or anything of that sort. I mean, on paper, the old Toyota Supra is not that great of a car. The reason why it's become so hyped is because of the pop culture. It's because of the movies. It's because of the video games surrounding it, that I think Toyota was very wise in doing. So I think the new Toyota Supra, the fact that it's less hyped up, gives it more room for improvement in a sense. I mean, it was super well received amongst members of the car world when it came out last year. It's already in production. If you look hard enough, you'll be able to see some on the road. I guess what I'm trying to say is the fact that it's not so hyped up to the point where it has to live up to the hype of this current generation. I think people know that the new Toyota Supra is not going to live up to the hype of the old, and not that that's a bad thing. It's just the other one was just so overhyped. I mean, there's no way for this car to live up to that hype. It's simply a different time. It's a different period. It's a different world. It's not going to be able to live up to the hype because of the change in times. But I think this gives this Supra a bit more room for improvement, a bit more room for expression. It's not bound exactly to what people are expecting. It's already fulfilled the expectations. It's a performer. It has similar horsepower ratings, similar performance numbers to the old one. And it's tuner friendly, just like the old one is. I feel like that's all it had to live up to. Were they expecting Toyota to just make a relaunch version of the Mark IV? Absolutely not. I mean, that it's an old antiquated car by now. What people were expecting, I believe, of the Supra is a nice evolution of the old, is a nice evolution of what once was. And I think Toyota and BMW, I have to mention BMW, have done a great job. You look at it and it makes your heart happy. It makes your heart remember the days of the Mark IV Supra. It makes your heart remember the Fast and Furious movies. It makes your heart remember your childhood playing, Need for Speed Most Wanted and getting away from the cops in your Toyota Supra. It makes your heart long for the days of old. And it brings them back. And that's what is expected, and that's what I believe Toyota wanted. So as far as that, I'm very, very, very pleased with the new Toyota Supra. My complaints, like I said earlier, I am a purist. I feel like the Toyota Supra, as much as it's great on the BMW Z4 platform, as much as I know it's going to cause it to perform wonderfully, just like all BMWs perform wonderfully, part of me just wishes that it was a Toyota. I mean, it has a Toyota badge, it has Toyota engineering, but it's not a pure Toyota. A part of me wishes that it was a pure Toyota. Just like the Supra of old, there is something about a purely Japanese car that is super special. I know Japanese cars are seen as boring here in America, but in Japan, where 90-something% of the cars on the road over there are produced in Japan, there are fun variants. There are exciting variants of the cars that exist over there, the Japanese cars. And I think it's great. I love it. But I wish it was a Toyota Supra. And I know it is a Toyota Supra, but I wish it was a purely Toyota Supra. There's not really any logical explanation. It's more of a heart thing. It's more of the fact that it's emotional. It's kind of like the same people who see the new C8 Corvette and still wish that it was front engine rear wheel drive. There's not a real reason for it to be. There's not a real benefit for it to be. It's just the fact that that's what we're used to, and that's what we want it to continue as. I'm used to seeing the Toyota as a purely Japanese product, and the fact that it's no longer a purely Japanese product is slightly disappointing. Granted, I love BMW. I know BMWs are not necessarily reliable, but as far as performing goes, I'd probably rather have a BMW over any other German car because of the fact that they are the driving machine. So the fact that Toyota chose BMW to merge with to create the new Supra, build it on the Z4 platform with the same engine, I think that's a wonderful idea, and I think Toyota did a great job. I know I kind of sound contradictory, but part of it is logic. My logic is saying, yes, good job, Toyota, for merging with BMW. And my heart is saying, I wish it was a Toyota. Moving on, what do I think will happen with the Toyota Supra? As Toyota has alluded to, I believe the Supra will come out with more performance-oriented versions in the future. It was purposely sold as basically bare bones as far as performance goes for the tuner crowd. And we know the tuner crowd, once these cars begin to get cheaper, are going to have a heyday with it. We know we're going to be seeing them at drag strips. We know we're going to be seeing them with two-step ignition timing that causes the exhaust to go, boom, boom, boom like a gun. I mean, we know we're going to see the whole 9 yards. We know we're going to see crazy lighting effects. We're going to see crazy paint jobs. We're going to see, them slammed on airbags, and we're going to see them stanced. We're going to see them having ridiculous camber. I mean, we're going to see what is typically associated with the tuner crowd that we all love so much. I know we're going to see that from the new Toyota Supra. So I'm very happy. I'm very happy that that's what I believe is going to happen with the Toyota Supra. I believe that Toyota not only is going to come out with more performance-oriented versions, I believe that this car will be a collector car in the future. It's going to be a different sort of collector car than the Mark IV. And I believe that this car is going to find its niche. It's going to be well appreciated. I hope that Honda responds to Toyota in the Supra. I hope that Nissan finally comes out with the 400Z to give the Supra a run for its money. Honda has an open door of opportunity here. Honda has the Acura NSX here in America, or the Honda NSX as it's known overseas in Japan. It has the NSX. The NSX is a mid-engined hybrid supercar. That's pretty awesome. It is not a Toyota Supra competitor, though. It is a C8 Corvette competitor. It is not a Toyota Supra competitor. It is a BMW i8 competitor. It is not a Toyota Supra competitor. I can't stress that enough. The only Toyota Supra competitor from Honda, was probably the Honda Prelude, And I know many people don't remember the Honda Prelude as much as I really like the Honda Prelude. People don't really remember it. It was a car that was briefly offered in the 90s to the early 2000s from Honda. It was one of the Japanese sports cars of the day. Honda's sports car offering has always really been the NSX. That's really been what they focused on. But I think Honda could do something special here. I think they could come out with a car in a similar price range to combat the Toyota Supra, and maybe even a bit cheaper than the Toyota Supra, to draw some crowd away from the Toyota Supra to get it to buy the new Prelude, if they're going to call it that. I feel like Honda's missing out on a window of opportunity over here. Nissan needs to come out with the 300Z. I can't stress that enough. Mitsubishi. I know Mitsubishi is really floundering these days as far as cars go. I think they offer the Mitsubishi Mirage, and that's about it. Mitsubishi can come out with something. Mitsubishi can come out with the 3000 GTO again. They could come out with their sports car of the 90s. I mean, if Japanese automakers are going to start bringing back their sports cars of the 90s, I mean, Mitsubishi was legendary back then. Mitsubishi needs to come out with something too. Toyota came out with the Supra. The Nissan Skyline GTR lives on today as the GTR. The 370Z, or at least the 300Z of the 90s, lives on today as a 370Z, soon to be the 400Z. Nissan has 2 sports cars. Toyota has 1 sports car. Actually, no, they have 2 sports cars, the Toyota 86 as well. And Honda has 1 sports car that's way out of price range. I mean, they need to come up with something else. They need to get into this market too. The cheaper, more affordable Japanese sports cars. So yeah, that's basically what I have to say about the Toyota Supra. We discussed a lot. We discussed the new Toyota Supra, its hype, its specs, what is to be expected of it. We discussed basically the market segment that it's going to be going into, the stiff competition it has, the fact that it doesn't have a manual transmission like the old one, and it doesn't have a manual transmission like the other offerings from basically Germany and the other car companies nowadays. And we discussed the history from the Mark I Supra. We actually discussed the history from the 2000 GT to the Mark I Celica Supra, to the Mark II, to the Mark III, where it finally became its own model, to the Mark IV, the legendary model that lives up to the hype even today, 20-something years later. And we discussed the incarnation of the Mark V Supra that is basically BMW Z4. We discussed a lot of things, and I discussed my personal thoughts on the Toyota Supra. So one final thought, if I may put it out there. I hope that Toyota keeps this car on the market. I hope that Toyota stays with it. Toyota is doing something very smart. Toyota is keeping their cars, whereas all American car companies have virtually abandoned the traditional car, the sedan. Toyota is keeping their cars. Toyota is keeping the Camry, the Corolla, the Yaris, and they're keeping the Supra. They're keeping the other cars that they offer here in the American market, which I think is wonderful. And I think that the Toyota Supra is really going to usher in a new era. A new era of tuner cars, because when you think of it, the tuner cars are really Honda Civics from the 90s. You take Toyota Supras from the 90s. You take, other sorts of Japanese cheaper cars that people find their hands on and tune them to ridiculous levels. I believe that this is a modern enthusiast's tuner car, and I think that it will be very well received, and I think it will sell very well, and I hope they keep it in production. So thank you for tuning in to this week's podcast. This has been David Lucy Mabel with the GSMC Podcast Network. I hope that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps us. And also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the GSMC Car Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type GSMC into your favorite podcast app to find all of the shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, from business news to weird news. Please subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed today's episode.